Welcome. In this video, I will go over the basics of structs in C++. So, what are structs? Structs are kind of like arrays in where you can group together multiple pieces of data. But where they differ from arrays is that you can group together related items that are of different data types. And to do this, we must first define the struct, and that looks just like this, where we have this keyword struct, which tells the compiler we are defining a struct. We then have the identifier of the struct, and this follows the same naming identifiers as all identifiers that we have in C++. And then we have some opening braces and some closing braces. And inside of those, we have some data types that we want and identifiers that we are going to call those data types. So we just have a bunch of variables inside of here, or members or elements, or there's many different names that people call these. And you can have as many of them as you want, and they can be of all sorts of different data types, as we will see in the examples going forward. And whenever we want to use this struct, we need to instantiate that struct. Instantiate just means we want to make an instance of that struct, or make a variable that holds that struct, or an object. So here we have us instantiating this struct up here. We are going to use the struct identifier, which is the data type of this variable. And then we are going to have an identifier that is going to be any identifier that we want to use this instance of this struct from within our program. So let's take a look at an example of a struct. Here we have a struct called student, and this struct has 4 elements. Those elements are first, last. Those are 2 strings. Those will represent the first and last name of this student. We have an integer, which is a grade, and that is just going to be the percentage that this student has. And then down here, we have the letter grade, which, would be A through F. And whenever we make an instance of this student struct, that instance of this student struct will have these 4 elements, and any instance of the student struct will have these 4 elements. So down here, we make an instance of the student struct by instantiating that student struct by using the data type of our variable here as student, which is the data type we have made up here. And then we make a identifier for this instance of our struct, which is called myStudent. Again, this myStudent has these 4 elements in it: first, last, grade, and letter grade. But how do we access these elements of this myStudent variable? Well, we need to use the dot operator, and the dot operator looks just like this. We are going to have the object, so we would have this myStudent, and then the dot operator and the member that we want to use. So it could be any of these 4 members: first, last, grade, or letter grade. And note that this dot operator for now is just going to be used for structs, but it is not only used in structs, it will be used later on in classes. And using this dot operator looks just like this, where we have an instance of a struct that we are making right here, and then down here we use the dot operator to access the elements of that struct, that instance of the struct, and use the assignment operator to set those elements of that struct to these pieces of data. We can then go down in our program and output those pieces of data from the struct using simple cout statements and using that dot operator again and the stream insertion operator. So let's take a look at structs in a program. Here we have a struct called student that has 7 elements in it, those being 2 strings, first and last, being the first and last names of the student. We have an NCHID, we have a number of classes, an age, those are all integers, And then we have a Boolean, which is going to say if they are currently enrolled, and a double, which would be the amount of financial aid that student has. If we come down here, we can see that we instantiate that student struct, this same student struct from up here, and we call that instance of this student struct Alex with this identifier Alex. We then come down here and we can see that we use the dot operator to store data in all of the elements of our instance of the struct, our Alex instance of the struct. We put Alex in the first name, Saint in the last name. Those are both strings. We put a integer into the NCID, a integer into the number of classes, and another integer into the age, because again, those are all integers up here in our struct. And then we have a Boolean, which is set to true, saying that this Alex is currently enrolled. And then we have a double of financial aid, which is set to 0. Poor Alex. We then come down here and we have some cout statements which output the elements of that instance of the Alex or of the student struct, which we have identified as Alex, and it's just outputting all of the elements contained within that instance of the struct. So if we come down here to a terminal and compile that program with G++ and the name of the program, we will get a file called a.out, which we can run with /a.out. And you see we get Alex Saint output to the terminal from right here, Alex and Saint being the first and last name that are contained in this instance of the struct, which are filled right up here. We get the enchi output from right here, which is filled right here. So there we get our enchi. We get the number of classes output, which we put as 2 up here. So that's why we get the 2. We get the age output, which is 26. So we get that 26 output. And then we get, since this is just a Boolean right here, that would be kind of not so interesting to just output true or false. So to say what that Boolean means, we will output the string is enrolled if it is true, because currently enrolled is the name of that Boolean. So if they're currently enrolled, obviously that would be set to true. And if it is set to false, then they are not enrolled. So we output is not enrolled. And lastly, we output the amount of financial aid that is given to Alex, which is 0, again, because up here we have 0 financial aid for Alex. And that is all that I have for you for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.